Okay. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's ALN BIMStorm for higher education. Before we get underway, we just want to thank our patron or our platinum organizational member, Onuma System, and Kimon Onuma for helping make this workshop possible. You can find out more at onumabim.com. And we want to thank all our patron members and other organizational members for making this and other programming that the ALN does possible. And if you're interested in working with us, please reach out and we can talk about how we can work together and maybe even do a workshop around your specific needs with tools like you will see today. And with that, I'll say if you're out there watching, please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar, because this is hopefully an engaging process. We want to hear from you and what your specific needs are and interests. And with that, I will bring in Mike Bordenaro, Executive Director for the ALN.
Thank you very much, Nick. Nick is the ALN Director of Technology, and I appreciate all he does. And we're going to provide an overview, but I want to let you know there's a lot of BIMStorm material. We've been doing these BIMStorms with Kimon Onuma since 2007 publicly, and there's the website, BIMStorm.com. And then we created a backstory on the BIMStorms that we have done with Kimon through the ALN. And so if you go to the website, you can find background material. And what we're doing is building on past BIMStorms. And this one is focused on higher education. And we're using a healthcare clinic as the facility and the equipment that we're planning. Hope you're able to participate as this moves forward. And then we're going to have special programs in between on earthquake relief planning. So if you're interested in that area, there's a couple of extra days where you can participate. And what we're doing with this exercise is focusing on the higher education industry. We're setting up the ALN Higher Education Asset Leadership Board, and this is our first activity. And what we want to do is teach institutions of higher education that they can improve the way they manage their own assets, but then they can also teach how to manage assets using these advanced processes. And we want this to be a demonstration for them. And what we're going to be doing is taking a healthcare clinic that we have first built in 2020 for the COVID pandemic situation. And then in 2022, we moved it to Kiev to show how it could help in disaster relief for the horrible war that's going on there. And unfortunately, there's a lot of need for these types of temporary healthcare clinics. And so we'll be moving it to Turkey and Syria. And what we've got is Kimon Onuma is going to be playing the role of the showrunner. He is going to be running the show, which means that he is the asset management consultant to our virtual university. Jack Dempsey is going to be the university president, the owner, and he's going to be saying why it's important to use these tools and processes and asset management in this way. And then Art Curlin, who has worked on these in the past, is going to be the virtual health department vice president. And there's Art getting a certification for university health at the National Academies from Dominic Townsend. And so we also want you to participate and to play the roles that you want to play and participate as you feel comfortable, or just observe. we've made some new friends with Arup, and they're participating, and new friends at Guidehouse that comes from shop architects, and old friends that come from the military. And so I don't think this is the time that we're going to have Jack talk, or should we go ahead and have Jack talk at this time, Kimon?
It's up to you. Yeah, either way.
Well then, yeah, why don't we go ahead to the previous slide and let Jack have his owner role. Jack, I want to start off by saying I came to all of this through the work that Kimon did with you at the Coast Guard. And it's been a great journey for more than 20 years to watch and now participate with you and Kimon in these. And you've got quite a legacy, including being on the board on infrastructure and constructed environment at the National Academies. You've had a lot of success with your managing assets and asset management paper, and now adding leadership. So you take over as the president of the university.
Okay, so I'll give a couple, I guess, kind of context points. First, I'm not a president of a university, so I can only hope to aspire to act as one. But I can definitely support the role of a mission owner and an asset manager, a person who's got particular interest in facilities. As backdrop, as you're showing here on the screen, is a recent report that we just produced at the National Academies, and it's kind of a good backdrop. NIST, the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, has two campuses that have critical mission capabilities there. One's in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and the other one is in Boulder. The research that they do is leading research. It's in many cases it's blue sky. There's a lot of commercial capabilities that do research, and this does kind of like the thing that nobody else can really do or can even pay for. So they have critical facilities. It's a campus environment. This study looked at the capital investments, which includes operation and maintenance that goes into those facilities, and conclusively documented that underfunding those facility assets have directly impacted the mission at NIST, which is mission critical to the U.S. NIST provides standards of technology and particularly standards of measurement in things like how to measure microchip, lines on a microchip. In fact, some of their instrumentation goes down to measuring the width of lines in terms of the number of atoms that get counted on an etch that would be on a chip that would go into a nano chip that would eventually maybe swim in our blood and solve a whole bunch of problems that we have. What was found is the under investing in facilities is impact the mission criticality or mission capabilities of those researchers, or those activities, in the tune of 10 to 40%. The committee, which I was a member of, figured out is about 20% in terms of reduction. So NIST, every dollar that goes into that through independent evaluations and IG audits, for example, demonstrates it's a 9-to-1 cash payoff. So 20% of that is pretty significant. That Department of Commerce budget coming up here used to be about $10 billion a year. I think in the recent passing from Congress, it's $50 billion. A big element that is they're trying to bring the microchip industry back on shore. And this was also critical in the fight against COVID, dealing with things like when I think you remember in the news where the baby food were in short supply, and this was actually providing the certifications of the instruments that tested the baby food to make sure that it was safe for the consuming public. So this study kind of provides a good backdrop for, I think, this BIMStorm, and it basically says, facilities are important. We know that, but it gets into the business case analysis of how that underfunding has direct impacts, which I think is very relevant to our conversation today. The second study is kind of a parallel study. It talks about, as showing here, shows how the methodologies that we use to do operations and maintenance, planning, master planning, basically add up to a very good statement of requirement, but the decisions or the conversation has to go further than that and talks about the value add. So at a higher education facility, for example, you have students that are going to go there. That university has to be in good repair and modern for the students and for the researchers and the faculty that do the work there. The method of how to do that is really a fundamental asset management solution. And asset management isn't just about managing the assets. It's about managing the value that's generated by the assets. That relationship is critical to decision making and also an evolving part of the conversation. So very much looking forward to participating in these BIMStorms and trying to share understandings on how we can better make decisions about investments in facilities and make the world a better place in a simple way.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack.
All right, so I guess I'm going to do a quick kind of an overview. We're not actually going through the workshop today and doing live exercises, but we're going to touch on some of the workflows. And just to give you a brief intro to the BIMStorm Mike talked about, it's been going on for many years. Actually, it's our 16th year, and it's kind of like an online workshop. And we've gone through the years, and we mentioned about the microgrid that happened a few years ago, and there was COVID. And if you go on the website, BIMStorm.com, you could see all the different BIMStorms that have happened over the years. Fundamentally, the reason why we started this was to first of all, enhance how you can collaborate on asset management and even design and construction. And we're going to be focusing on higher education. And on the website, we actually have buttons that point you to different tools. These tools are available for free. You can buy them. We'll walk through some of them today. Some of them are our own, but we also use a lot of other industry applications. And that's a constant struggle in the industry as we're evolving, is how do we connect the dots between different systems that don't like to talk to each other or haven't in the past. We try to keep everything kind of data driven on the web, and that kind of drives into the whole ISO standards of being able to collaborate and have repeatable processes. So we'll be using these tools to do that. The scenario that we're actually planning is, like Mike mentioned, we had different sessions with previous BIMStorms on the microgrid in Ukraine, and then we had for healthcare planning with Art Kurland in Texas, and for this one we're focusing on educational planning and medical and healthcare planning, and we focused in on Ankara, Turkey. Mike, do you want to give just a brief kind of intro why we chose this? It might be good context of what we're seeing here.
Thanks, Kimon. The United Nations has an asset management program, and the Asset Leadership Network is helping them promote their asset management structure and approach. And the way we're doing that is working through our colleagues at Washington, D.C. and their sister cities. Well, it turns out that Washington, D.C. is sister cities with Ankara, Turkey. And Ankara has the Ankara University. So we are making an assumption, just like Jack isn't the president of a university, we don't have the ability to land temporary healthcare facilities at the Ankara University, but we're doing this as a demonstration that perhaps these mobile units, healthcare clinics that we've worked with in the past might be established on the campus. Ankara University is focused on medical students, and perhaps they would want to practice in these temporary facilities so that when they get to a disaster area, they're familiar with the type of equipment and facilities they would need to be working in to serve people in need.
That's great. So one other thing I'd like to stress is we're kind of showing a large range of different use cases, but they're based on actual things that have happened with other organizations or other owners. We're trying to bring the best of practices together. So a lot of these workflows, we've been working with the National Institute of Building Sciences on with owner organizations there, and NIBS, National Institute of Building Sciences, is going to be joining us on future workshops on the middle of March. So anyway, what I'd like to kind of show is just one of the tools. So we're imagining if there's a university owner like this that says, hey, we need a new clinic. There's been an emergency. We need to quickly figure out how we can fit a clinic on the site. We have a building here. This is a block. This represents previous exercises that happened with microgrid. That says, okay, if we need to put a clinic here and there's no electricity, where do we actually get power? And that was the microgrid. Can we get a 20 kilowatt array? So these blocks that we're moving around are just a shape to see how they fit on the site, but they have all the data in the background, the knowledge that was captured. And if we drill into it, you'll actually even see individual assets inside them. But to step back, another tool that we're going to be using is called Program to BIM. And this has been used for many different owner organizations as well. It was set up with different types of object assets, which are spaces and equipment, in this case for healthcare or for education. So you go to these tabs and you can actually see different types of tools here. You can actually try this out. Maybe Nick, you can put it in the chat if anybody wants to try it live, but I'll walk through just a simple exercise here of imagine that we have to program for a new healthcare clinic in Ankara, Turkey, for this situation that's happening right now. And we have kind of a list. And this was set up kind of like an Amazon shopping cart. And in the background, there's a database. There's a lot of technology happening in the background. But for the front end here is to allow users to quickly make a decision. Okay, we need one of these and two of these. And this is kind of like a shopping cart, essentially. It's going and pulling all the information that you need for this type of an exam room or an operating room or whatever it might be. You basically go through and you select how many of these you want. This can also be automated where you set up these rules and say, if you have this many patients, you need this many. But the basic concept here is instead of having to go and research each time of what do we need in an operating room, what do we need if it's in Turkey, what do we need if it's in DC, all those rules in the background should be automated so we can get to the information quickly to make those decisions about what type of assets do we need to put on a site like this. And so I'm just made a list here. And if I go to my shopping cart now, it actually builds up that list and says, here's what you just ordered, just like you're ordering from Amazon. And you could change the quantities. And this is all free. This is a free tool. It's based on actual tools that we've worked with over the years, including the NIBS project I mentioned earlier. And what you do here is you say, okay, here's a list that I need. I'm going to put my email address here, and I'm going to give it a name. So clinic in Ankara. Take a look and say, save an Excel file of this list, or I could say, let's build what's called a building information model. So it's taking all of that information with hundreds of pieces of equipment and building this clinic on the fly with the requirements. So it says it's done. And then what happens is you get an email. You can actually try this out if you want. And the email kind of looks like this and says, okay, your clinic is ready. Let's go take a look at it. So this is an email that came back to me. And now it went and grabbed from the database, grabbed all the information, and essentially set up the framework of what we need. It built a multi-story clinic with different education and healthcare mixtures. So the first floor is healthcare spaces that we just selected. And each one of these has IDs and assets with other information associated with them. So we don't have to think about, okay, what is this medical piece of equipment in this room that you need for an eye exam in this case? It's all there, and you can then use this as a starting point to continue the design, move it around, which I showed, which we'll go into next. So this is kind of assembling all the knowledge of the pieces of a facility that need to support this mission for this particular owner on this particular site, and then be able to collaborate with other participants in the BIMStorm. So you don't have to be just a technical user. You can also be a subject matter expert that knows what needs to go into a clinic on a higher educational campus like Jack is representing as an owner, and give us input here. So Jack, maybe a quick comment about this, because I know from an ISO perspective, being able to kind of capture and have these repeatable processes is an important piece. Is that in line with what you think would make
Absolutely.
sense?
I mean, lots of things going on here, but what's really attractive and I think exciting about this capability is you've immediately elevated the conversation up to a much higher level in terms of saying like, what if I get 3 eye clinics or 3 eye exam rooms as opposed to 1, and show me that. So now you're able to have, as an executive, you can jump ahead into saying, just kind of getting eyes on, seeing what it looks like. Then you might say, well, I don't want to have 7 of these things. Then you start recognizing like all of a sudden it's too big for the footprint, or you got to go up to a 3rd story and those kinds. So that easy cause and effect relationship to very basic decisions like, capacity, patient throughput, number of physicians that might be and resident in this environment are all very important, kind of like leading indicators, and to show the consequences of the relationship of how those affect the decision is really important, because most of executives or university presidents is going to be thinking about how many people can I put into this environment, and then very quickly you can show me the implications of what that involves, as opposed to coming back next week and saying we can do that and it's going to cost us much. So that's really exciting. One additional point is it starts establishing a kind of like a level of trust and understanding, because as a planner or an architect having this conversation, you're meeting the executive at the executive's level of understanding, and you can quickly answer specific questions. If it comes up like, do you have this piece of equipment there, you can say yes or no, or say, yep, we just replaced it with the piece of equipment you want, now we can move forward. So lots of levels of positivity here. I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Okay, so a couple other quick points about what we're seeing here. One is there's a lot of data in the background, like I mentioned, and if I wanted to see it as an Excel file, I can say, well, give me all the equipment of this. And as you were talking, Jack, I actually downloaded kind of the Excel file of here are the spaces, and here's all the list of equipment, every single one, the hundreds and hundreds, as you can imagine, when you start adding even just a few spaces. The Excel file is good because you can see it as a list, but just one point I want to make is we're in our industry, a lot of times in design, construction, facility management, asset management, we're used to kind of taking an Excel file and attaching it to an email. But imagine if you're trying to make a reservation for an Uber, an asset for a ride, right? You would never imagine I want to send my Uber driver an Excel file and tell him where I am. It's basically just push a button and it shows up and it takes you where you need to go. That's the equivalent here. We're trying to say, okay, if we're all digital, what does it look like? So for example, not only the Excel file, but I can send you this link. So I could say, I want to email this link to the people on the screen, and I'm going to send you this email now, and it has a link back to this. So you're then going to be seeing exactly what I built here. So that's what the BIMStorm, these workshops are about. How do we start collaborating and getting input from different participants that we're all on the same page? And then we can start running through, okay, now how do we fit it on this site in Ankara? So here's a clinic. This one is a little bit more worked out. We have more spaces in it, but does it fit here? Does it fit here? Do we need to put a temporary facility there? We were working with for the COVID response. So that's what these Cura pods are here. We were collaborating with other organizations. And then if I open up these clinics and then go inside it, then you start seeing the details of what those look like. So I could go inside the clinic, and now we had, I think it was Mark Gianni, an architect, that went in and grabbed those spaces and said, okay, now let's go do a quick arrangements, make sure it fits in the building. So it's really assembling a ton of data in the background as a graphical view, and then being able to have the conversation with the different participants. Mike, you wanted to say something about this?
Yeah, two things. One, can you show a list of the equipment?
Yeah, that's the Excel file that I did earlier. There's multiple ways of doing that, but yeah, this is all the equipment in the, yeah.
So then the information from the initial planning resides in a database that does not go away. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah. doesn't go away, and it starts giving you estimates too. So it's calculating the cost, for example, or the
And if
area, or the
people
number of
want
people.
energy use or water use or whatever is important to them, the spaces can be pre-programmed in that manner.
That's right. And that's what we did with a microgrid, right? We said, well, here's an array. How much energy does that produce? And how much what is the demand of this building for energy? And how do we strategize if we're only running on batteries, what equipment do we need to shut off to be able to continue to operate? Obviously, if you're off grid, then you need to run with batteries. So it's kind of this emergency scenario planning of being able to understand, first of all, what you have, and then figure out which ones are the critical assets here, and then have that conversation about how do we react to that.
The other thing I wanted, go
Mhm.
ahead, Jack.
I bring up a good point, because I mean, we're talking about, there's a contingency operation where you have to rapidly, do something, bring in temporary facilities and make sure that you have the capacity to do certain things. COVID is a kind of an example of that. There's all types of circumstances for that. I think more typically, it would be, kind of a little bit of a methodical process, but the ability to provide not just the visualization of this information to kind of get people on the same page, like this is what the building looks like. They're familiar with buildings. They're going to have opinions, whether you're a department head or a researcher, you're going to have specific requirements, and you can kind of talk through those. But the ability to very quickly go back to, critical equipment. I mean, Art's not with us today, but many conversations I've had with Art about, his efforts to manage critical equipment in a hospital setting. He needs to know certain things about this equipment. Power, obviously, there's certain safety parameters. Sometimes you're working with chemicals or even radioactive materials that need critical attention. So, for example, the ability to look at, we're going to have an X-ray system here in this space. I mean, you might not want a like a daycare center next door. I mean, just, it could be safe, but it's just not going to be, things that might be immediately obvious. But the ability to have that conversation with people at multiple different levels in the way that they need to have that conversation is very important. So when you're getting up to at a higher level, and you can look at this information and you can look around the table and you got a lot of head nods like, yep, this is what I'm on board with, this is very helpful. I mean, it gets the problem solving to a much higher level, more impactful level quickly.
Mhm.
And then I
Yeah,
wanted to add something earlier about ISO 55001. Involve all relevant stakeholders. What this does is allow non-expert stakeholders to be able to comment on things because they see it in a very real way. And they're able to say things like, you can't put it there because the fire truck needs to get through. And it really allows people to have positive input.
Right. Yeah, in fact, on the Kharkiv scenario that we planned, it was pretty interesting because we were talking about getting containers to the containers with microgrid capabilities. And then we also have the arrays that come out of the containers and where we park them. But we were going all the way back to what port do we get it in from? So if you zoom all the way back, you say, okay, this port is not available. It's shut down for whatever reason, right? So then you're getting into logistics of we need to support this need in this place right here, but we need to get these containers here, and we need to have one array next week and another one we can wait till 2 weeks. And then once you start parking these next to this clinic that we were just looking at, it immediately says, okay, if you only have one array, we can only support so many patients with this type of equipment, and this equipment can run off batteries, but other ones cannot. So there was this kind of a pretty interesting, very specific scenarios that we got input from the SMEs that knew about logistics, knew about power capabilities, along with the clinic and how much space do you need for the patients, and where does the equipment fit, and what alternate equipment do we have to bring light into an operating room if we don't have full power. We're going to run off batteries. Okay, we need certain kind of lighting fixtures. All that stuff that knowledge of all the different people coming together set up the scenario from an asset management perspective that went much broader than just, okay, let's just design a clinic, which is just the result of the physical result, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the background that's related to this ISO discussions.
So the interesting thing with that BIMStorm last year was we involved people who are actually sending solar microgrids to Ukraine for hospitals to use. They were specifically using them to power operation headlamps because power went out frequently and the doctors needed to be able to keep seeing while they were operating. One of our organizational members, Mott McDonald, has already sent people to Turkey. And so at our next event, we're going to be talking about what they really saw and what is actually important. And one of the great things about these BIMStorms is the ability to do things on the fly. And if they tell us that a clinic is not what's really necessary, what's necessary is temporary housing, then we can switch in a second and start using their real information to be able to show what can be done.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, I want to just hit on one thing you brought up, Mike, and I think it's kind of more, when we bring up the asset management angle, you know, planners, engineers, maintainers are very versant in the details and can tell you, you know, the nth degree of how certain they are about something or where the questions are. But when you elevate to that higher level, you're talking about an asset. The asset obviously is a building, but it's also the throughput and capability of what that building is supporting. So if it's a medical clinic, for example, how many patients can you move through that building and how long does that take? You know, the doctors can explain to you what they need in terms of moving patients through the building. If they can look at the building, they get an understanding of the configuration of the building, and that will help them understand what they can achieve and how long that or how difficult that might be to do that throughput metric or whatever they might be looking at. The executive is going to be looking at that building as an asset in terms of the ability to serve or treat people. So the asset itself is understood differently at different levels of the decision making, and that's where the asset management system or the perspective of asset management, I think, really adds value and makes the information that we're looking at here even more relevant.
It occurred to me to say there just that, you know, it's not just the building and the equipment that are the assets we're talking about. The data is an essential asset in this equation of making good decisions, and just how important the building information models are and this virtual workspace to keep all of that data in one source of truth that can be updated in real time based on changing environments.
Yeah. Very important point, Nick. In fact, what I have on screen is interesting because the first thing that we did on the microgrid is let's just start a list of all the assets that are needed for microgrids. And then we don't know all the technical details. We had other specialists fill this in. And this is actually the beginning of a database. It could be a very simple spreadsheet because this is always a challenge. Okay, where do we get this information? And we said, okay, let's, in this case, we use Google Sheets. And we said, let's just start adding it to this Google Sheet. How big is it? What does it do? It consumes or produces power. How many of these do we need? What's it called? And then there's a lot of stuff in the background that we also added, you know, logistically, is it available? Is it not available? Can we ship it here? Then we took this list because we had the physical sizes here. That's how we started actually landing it on the site, because now we know that object on that site or that asset inside the building, does it fit on the site or not? And you can start playing with real stuff. And then in the background is all that data, and that data can come from multiple different sources, but the single source of truth, being able to point to that location and link it to that shape, no matter what tools you're using, is critical. So then when you're down at this level, and you're planning 6 pods of exam rooms, you're working with a simple shape because now you're trying to decide, does it fit here? But inside that is all the information about the equipment and assets and all the logistics about, can we get it here? So all of this kind of starts to fit together.
What this approach does, I've got to step back and laugh, because when we first started doing these BIMStorms, we had to convince people that we could do this for the building industry, because Travelocity, actually we were saying Expedia, has already done it for the travel industry, where they're using databases from Hertz, American Airlines, Hyatt, and Hilton, and they're bringing all this information together in real time for you to plan your vacation or your business trip, and that it's the same processes. And one of the things I admire about Kimon is he is advocating a process. Do it this way. He's not saying use my software. This, my software is the only way to do it. He is using his software to demonstrate what is possible nowadays. And we had a question from Megan Peterson. Let me go to the answered. Nick had written something in, but I want to bring this up to all of the panelists. Megan asked, is there a potential to build your own asset space modules and program to BIM based on needs if you're not working in healthcare and education realm? And that's a great question, because it indicates there's interest beyond this. So Kimon does have a number of different types of scenarios set up. He's got transportation. What are the other ones you've got?
Education, office. But yeah, to answer the question, is all of these modules that they look just like images here, but in the background's a database. So you could take this, adjust just an Excel file and say, we don't need all this equipment in here. We only need 30 out of the 40, and it would adjust the model basically, or the room size needs to be bigger. So these are not static modules. This is what we did with the NIBS in the Department of Veterans Affairs. We said, okay, you have a database. You don't have these static blocks. As it changes, if the need changes, so you could take this entire list of hundreds of spaces and say, well, here's a new owner in another country that needs 10% more space in this set of rooms, or these other assets in the other rooms. So the data drives into these modules, and then you have a whole new set. So what we're showing here are just generic ones, but imagine this being adjusted to different uses, and that's exactly what we did with the transportation on with SMEs, Mark Giuliani's team that knows about airport planning. It's like, okay, what do you need for airports? Okay, it's the same type of thing. It's a list of stuff, and you need space for people, you need space for baggage, you need secure areas, you need transportation, you need restaurants, whatever. All this stuff is just like a kit, like Legos, but they're dynamic, they can change. It's back to that Uber example. You push a button and the Uber shows up. It's not you go and build a car. It's basically you call the cars to you.
I really like Megan's question. And I like Megan. Megan was with Shop Architects, which is a firm I really admire. And she's now with Guidehouse, setting up a BIM department at a large consultant company. And it's publicly known that the healthcare modules were set up through a contract that Kimon had with the VA and the Department of Defense health system. And so if there are federal agencies like NIST that wants to set up semiconductor lab situations, then Kimon could make these modules. And like I said before, it's not about Kimon making them, it's about using this approach. And anybody can do it. He's not saying his is the only way. Of course, if you want to get a good head start, working with him would be good, but it's about the process.
It seems to me that this type of conversation would be the type of conversation where you could kind of game through a configuration for a different type of perspective. I think Megan's point, this is great for healthcare and education, if I'm understanding correctly. But what if I'm doing something different? I'm opening up McDonald's a franchise, and I want to have kind of a standardized format, or I have office space that I need to start re-engineering or redesigning based on the habits of how we work today. I mean, how challenging is that to do. And it seems like this kind of environment might be a way to kind of spitball a good enough answer that you can just kind of continue to perfect. Is that how this happens?
Correct. Yeah. In fact, this goes all the way back to the Coast Guard work that we did, right? So you could start with an Excel file. This is an example of an Excel file that Scott Giselle from Christopher Newport University's program building. You start with a list of spaces, if there were assets inside it, and then you can start working with that. But yeah, you can configure it to anything. It's not just healthcare and higher ed. It's basically just assets and spaces, and that's universal, whether it's an airport, healthcare, or whatever, and just getting everybody on the same page.
So Kimon, let me see if I've got that right. Scott Gazelle, who is one of the attendees today, created this from your, was it education to BIM?
No, he actually just started with an Excel file. So if I go into
Oh,
here
okay.
and say, I want to see, he had a program in Excel, and then he imported it in and then started configuring it just with the blocks. The
Gotcha.
actual equipment is not as important, but the spaces, if I take the Excel file out of this, it basically generates an Excel file in reverse. So here's the Excel file that generates from those spaces. So it's a list of all the spaces and other information that was added afterwards. But you can start just with a list of spaces, just like we did on the microgrid, right? We said, okay, we have a list of assets that the microgrid needs. How big are they? That's exactly what we did there. We just said, start with a blank list. Let's at least get everybody agreeing on this list. How big of space, width and depth, feet and inches of container, we know how big it is. So you could start, this is a minimal set, and this could come from anywhere. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a Word document for that matter, but just a list of things with sizes and some kind of ID.
So
Then you
if
keep on
I
layering more.
understand this correctly, Scott had a program already in an Excel spreadsheet. Scott, if you want to become a panelist and comment instead of just having me ask these general questions, go ahead and let us know that you're okay to be made a panelist in the chat section, and we can bring you in. But it's possible to start with an Excel spreadsheet and then generate building information model from that.
Shapes. Yeah.
You know, one thing that's popped out here, and I think it's been talked about before, and I think it came up in an earlier comment, is once we get an inventory, it's obvious to recognize that we can put that against a schedule of values and understand that this is going to cost about this much to build out this space. But one thing that I thought I heard, and I'm interested in the maturity of this capability, is once you build a space, there's a cost to operate it in terms of the energy efficiencies and the trade-offs that might happen. Also, the operations and maintenance has models, the ability to extrude cost requirements, not just for initial costs, but life cycle costs and operating costs. Those are all, I mean, how close are we to achieving that type of nirvana, so to speak, in terms of understanding costs?
You can attach it to the asset as if you remember, then you can start attaching it. And that starts the conversation, right? Even if it's a placeholder, you can say, well, I know it costs approximately $1,000 for this asset. Somebody else might come along, the engineer might come along later and say, no, it's actually $995. Then when you actually build it out, it's another number. And along the way, if you have information about energy use, just like we did the microgrids, we had the SMEs that knew exactly how much energy was capable from that microgrid battery pack, and they gave it to us. And this was actually the input form, that Excel file that I showed earlier. We created a form like that, very simple. This is a free tool on Google Forms. You start organizing the structure of how you collect it so it feeds into the database, so you don't have to go and transform it. Then you start pushing it into the model. I see Scott on screen now. Let's hear from Scott.
Good afternoon, everybody. I can.
Yeah. Thanks
So,
for joining us.
Yeah, just a little background. We're in the process of planning for a new building. Actually, my new building here at Christopher Newport University, and working with an architect. They came up with the initial space program, essentially just a spreadsheet, and but there's multiple people in my building in different divisions, and they were starting to struggle with conceptualizing what this was going to look like and So having worked with Kimon and Jack in a previous life in the Coast Guard, I said this might be a good tool to use. So I basically took that spreadsheet, imported it into Kimon's tool, and got just the blocks. And that's all I needed. I went in, color coded it by division. My next step is go sit down with everybody and say, okay, does this look, close to, at least for adjacencies and working out your standard planning stuff. And then we can, further refine building, size on the site. We can land it, start looking at more details, but it's really the process. The data was there. It was in a spreadsheet. It just wasn't in a user-friendly format that most nerds, spreadsheet nerds could look at and really understand and get their hands around it.
So what is your role at the university?
I'm the director of facilities management.
Excellent. So do you see there needing to be a policy change to have this occur for the entire university, or is the idea of doing one building as like a pilot to get people on board with the process a good way to go?
I think it's kind of a pilot. Interestingly, in the back of my mind, our state agency that we report to on the facilities and capital side, I believe that if you actually got into the BIM and the objects that Kimon was showing earlier, on one hand, I think their eyes would be wide open, but on the other side, I think they would freak out because you're like, you've gone too far in developing this. Yet, because they get very squishy on how far you can bring something in a planning mode until you cross over to the design side. And we're not really designing. I mean, the objects are there. You're just pulling them in and tweaking them to your needs. We haven't gotten that far yet, but it's something. I'm going to try to work with our local AE that's doing the planning for us, and to say, hey, is this what do we think? And maybe start using this to float it up to the state agency to say, if everybody in the state used a similar tool, because the space standards are the same across the state, this could help with cost estimating and all the stuff that everybody breaks trying to just do planning on a spreadsheet.
So you bringing up something that the Asset Leadership Network has slowly come to understand. It's not about the tools or the processes. Those are all proven. It's about the culture and doing this in a way and revealing this in a way that allows people to understand the value and benefits and almost make them think that it's their idea. That's the big win. If they say, well, that's the way we were going to do it anyhow.
Yeah, and that actually is an important point about presenting the information in a format that is appropriate for who is consuming it, right? So if you put too much detail, like you said, Scott, people get afraid sometimes, but you can actually hide the detail in the background. You basically are filtering what gets presented. It's not that you're hiding it, you're just basically presenting it in a format that makes it easy to understand. And the complexity could still be in the background. You can audit it backwards. And I think that's the part that always has interested me is, can you zoom in and zoom out as needed and even adjust it on the fly depending on who you're presenting it to. So if it's an executive wants it a different way, and then with facilities, actually we run into this all the time, working with Los Angeles community colleges too. The people in the field with the facilities, they don't care about the details of the very detailed models about how the building is laid out, but they want to find that asset and be able to react, work orders, preventive maintenance, whatever. And over the years, we found that if we can make the interface as simple as possible for those end user, whoever it might be, then it makes it much easier to then collaborate and use that same source of information to have those discussions. Say, well, this is connected to energy too. How's energy doing? What Jack was asking earlier too. So that's what all of this is really all about. It's not focusing on a single tool, but the connectivity between systems and applications is important. Otherwise, you have these silos that don't talk to each other.
I think it goes further than that, and of course, Kimon, you've witnessed this many times over. But your point on the connectivity of the communications. I mean, when you're depending on what role you have at the organization, if you're the maintenance manager, you're going to be interested in details that the instructors who might be using that space really are not interested in at all. And also, the executives, the college president, directors are going to be interested in a different aspect. They're going to be looking at the same picture. I mean, one thing with the geometry and the site plans, the 3D, provided a common picture, common frame of reference that people see out their window every day or going to work every day. What they understand and how they interpret it is very different. And I think that's an element of this asset management perspective that's just enriches the conversation. So when you think about managing assets, being an engineer myself, I start thinking about the technical details, the inventory, the cause and effect, the life cycle of these assets and the requirements that are required to support that. Almost everybody else looks at that asset as that's a place I go to work, or that's a place I go to eat, or that's a place that I like to hang out when I don't have to do either one of those because it kind of makes me feel better about myself. It's got sunlight and all that kind of stuff. It's a very different concept. And the concept of the asset, likewise, just like the geometry, becomes an organizing perspective that can be used to help in the communications. And that, personally is part of my attraction to the asset management perspective, where we can look at effectively the same picture and really understand something very different, but have a good communication about understanding the cause and effect, the relationship, and even the requirements and cost of these things. And I think that's another aspect that's really expanding and kind of being introduced to this conversation in current terms.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and actually bringing it back to the BIMStorm approach on all these different topics we talked about, we're kind of went the whole range, the whole life cycle around it. We're planning, now we're designing, now we're operating, now we're managing assets, doing asset management. I think it'd be interesting in the actual workshops that are coming up, if anybody else has a scenario they want to insert, just like Scott did, to actually, let's try it out. That's what we do here. We try, whether even other applications, it would be great if somebody has a different tool that says, well, here's a tool that we use. How do we connect that to this ecosystem? I'm going to go back to one of the previous ALN sessions we had with the Los Angeles community colleges. What's really interesting about this group is there's a community college in Los Angeles which has 11 million square feet. At the state level, they have 90 million square feet. They have a common database at the state level that is all their asset inventory, all their buildings, all their spaces, how many students, all that stuff. And they use it for multiple things, but one thing they use at the state level is for capital planning and bond, deciding where to spend money. At the community college level, they're actually dealing with the design and construction of the facilities. At the community college level, they're also dealing with facility managers and technicians that need to do work orders. So if you start thinking of this as a Lego stack and all these tools are talking to each other, that's the thing that makes this work, is we're all talking about the same room at the state level as we're talking about when we're in the field at that room level. And by keeping the applications neutral, you can also have future applications plugging in and not have to rebuild the whole stack. And this is what helps to make it scale, because the complexity of these systems, it makes it impossible if you think about 20 different systems that don't talk to each other, but it's putting them together, you're not rebuilding the foundation. And that then you can start creating new use cases and say, well, we need to present a dashboard to the executives that don't care about all the technology behind it. They want to know, how are we doing on, spending money or whatever. And that's a different view on this, right? The financial side that has nothing to do with how pretty it looks on a site plan or is it on the site that we're just looking at, but it's all connected.
So, Kimon, that's kind of a direct challenge to Megan Peterson. If there's something that she's thinking of doing, that maybe we can work on that.
From now until March 22nd. Yeah. So we have the March 22nd session, right? But we also have the in between. We're doing stuff virtually, so it doesn't have to be just at the session.
Right. So just so you know, Kimon, Megan works with Moshe Nelson at Guidehouse.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for joining us. We're approaching the top of the hour here, Mike. Are we?
Yeah,
You wanna
I
close
think we've
something
covered
out?
everything. Scott, did you have any additional comments?
Really, it's, you know, for those new to this, to me, the aha moment was when I saw that, you know, you could connect the data to the model. And again, you know, the model can just be a square on the page, but behind that model, I've got it labeled as, okay, it's this person's office, this is the function. And then, you know, you can start bringing stuff into, you know, actual 3D models and stuff as you get more sophisticated. But it's just a powerful tool that's data driven. And that's, you know, the pictures are pretty, and that's a lot of marketing and salesmanship, but it's really the data behind it that's where the power is.
And that's where asset management is. And we are in the information age. So asset management is very much information management. And the thing that I've always loved about this approach since the beginning is it allows people to say, I see what you're talking about related to complex situations. And when people see why they need to change their behavior, they will get the results that they intend, then they start changing their behavior. And the visualization is the powerful enabler. Jack, you want to make any comments?
I mean, it's exciting. I can't wait till the next cycle of meetings. I think it's you know, it's eye-opening. But I think the element that really, for me, really it kind of empowers and it makes me excited even more so is the ability to communicate with more people, have more people participate in the conversation, gain understanding faster, get that conversation to a higher level of understanding and decision making, and ultimately, you know, end person and user satisfaction. I mean, when they know and understand what they're getting, and they can see how that's going to take time or maybe you know, come at some expense, they can have a greater appreciation of the product when it is delivered and be more involved in that activity. And I think just from my days as a construction manager, facility manager, that was always an element of, you know, limiting factors when we turned over an asset or a facility to the end user, and you know, they weren't exactly happy with everything. This brings that decision point a lot earlier in the process, that understanding a lot earlier in the process, and really, I think, empowers the communications that are going to overall make better use of our assets, better use of our limited resources, and ultimately make the organizations more productive in what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and that ties into something that Nick said earlier that's really important: trust. Nick, you want to make any final comment?
Oh, just to say that value was something we kept coming back to, and to people at different places in different organizations. You know, they have different requirements. They want to see things in different formats, and the value they're looking for is slightly different. And I just like how these tools and this process can show people where they're at and where they want to be, and connect the dots of how to get to where they want to be in a visual manner. And the other, Mike, was your point about culture, and just the culture that uses tried and tested tools and processes to, I think Kimon says, capture decisions and then keep them somewhere that they can be updated regular with changing conditions. I just like coming back to value and culture for sure.
Thank you. Kimon, that leaves you to wrap things up.
Yeah, right at the top there. All right, thank you, everybody. It's exciting to start this off, and it's interesting to see the path that we came from. Right, we went from Texas to Kharkiv to Ankara, back around the world and back to DC, I guess.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Well, thank you for
All right.
getting us started on this BIMStorm. I'm excited to see what inputs we get leading up to the next event. And I hope you all join us back again, March 22nd. But of course, next week you can participate in the program for focusing on earthquake relief. And thank you to our organizational members. I'm sure Kimon doesn't want to show the slide that says thank you to our platinum member Onuma, but we do thank you very much for your leadership in all of this, and all of our other organizational members and our patron members. So thank you, and thanks to all the people who attended. Please reach out to us with any questions or comments. And thank you very much to Scott Gazelle for being our special guest today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Nick. Mike.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.